You know, when you think about universities, especially the big names, there's often this kind of feeling that their massive endowments are the key, maybe the secret sauce to their success.
Hmm,
And with all the recent headlines, about places like Harvard facing backlash, even losing federal funds, it really makes you stop and think.
it does.
Are these gigantic financial reserves actually essential? Or is it maybe, a bit overhyped?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or maybe the billion-dollar question in some cases.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we're really asking, are university endowments fundamentally necessary, or could universities actually get along, maybe even thrive, without them?
It's a really fascinating and, like you said, timely thing to explore
Hmm.
because you hear these huge numbers, billions of dollars, and it's easy to picture universities just swimming in cash.
Right, like a giant bank account.
But to really get a handle on this, we need to be clear on what an endowment actually is.
Yeah.
We're talking about financial assets, right?
Mhm.
Donations, investments, bequests.
Money given or grown over time.
Exactly. And it's set up specifically to generate a steady income stream. Think maybe 4 or 5% return each year, typically.
Oh, okay, so a percentage they can spend.
Yeah. And that income supports all sorts of university activities. But the crucial thing to get right off the bat is that this isn't just, a pot of money they can dip into whenever they feel like it.
Right, it's not like they see a need and just poof, withdraw a billion, which kind of leads to what some people call the endowment myth, doesn't it?
Uh-huh. The idea that these funds are this indispensable treasure chest.
Yeah, that without it, the whole university crumbles. So our mission today really is to dig into that for you. Let's try to uncover what these endowments are truly for, maybe debunk some myths,
Clear up the confusion.
and explore if universities can actually flourish operating differently, maybe looking at examples, perhaps even like the University of Oxford, which has one, but maybe doesn't rely on it quite how we assume.
Okay, good plan. So let's start with that first big myth. The idea that endowments are just idle cash sitting around.
Yeah, doing nothing.
Well, the reality is quite different. What's important for you to grasp is that these funds are almost always actively managed. Universities invest them,
Okay, so they're working the money.
definitely,
Yeah.
in stocks, bonds, real estate, all sorts of assets. The goal is twofold.
Mm.
Grow the original amount over the long haul and generate that annual income we talked about.
Makes sense. But you mentioned restrictions earlier. That seems key.
Oh, absolutely critical. There are often major restrictions, sometimes from the original donors.
Like, this money must be used for.
Exactly. Must be used for scholarships for left-handed tuba players from Nebraska. Okay, maybe not that specific, but you get the idea.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Or maybe maintaining a specific building, perhaps?
Precisely. And then universities also have their own internal policies that limit how funds can be spent. So even if there's a really pressing need somewhere else,
Tough luck if the money's earmarked.
pretty much. And this isn't just a small portion we're talking about. No. A 2023 report from NCUBO Dues, that's the National Association of College and University Business Officers, found that about 60%,
60%. Wow.
yeah, 60% of endowment funds at U.S. universities are restricted. They come with strings attached.
That paints a very different picture. So not much flexibility there, really.
Very little in many cases.
Yeah.
So myth one, idle cash, definitely busted. They're invested and often restricted.
Okay. What's another common idea about endowments that maybe isn't quite right?
Well, there's this perception that they're exclusive clubs.
Right.
Only for the Harvards, the Stanfords, the super elite, wealthy institutions.
Right, the ones with the headlines about their multi-billion-dollar fund.
Exactly. And while, yes, their endowments are massive and get a lot of press, the interesting thing is that endowments exist all across higher education. It's not just the Ivy League.
Really? Like smaller colleges, too?
Absolutely. Take Grinnell College in Iowa. It's a relatively small liberal arts school, about 1,700 students,
Okay.
their endowment. Around $2.5 billion.
$2.5 billion
Mm.
for 1,700 students. That's
Yeah.
a lot per student.
It's significant, yeah. And it goes beyond four-year schools, too. Community colleges often have endowments.
Oh, kidding.
Yep. Now, they're typically much, much smaller, maybe only $1 million, sometimes less.
Still, it's an endowment.
It is, designed to support maybe some scholarships or smaller projects. The point is, they exist at many different types of institutions.
So if everyone from Harvard down to a local community college has one, even a small one, does that automatically mean they're essential for survival? It makes you question the necessity, doesn't it?
It really should make you pause and think. If different kinds of institutions with vastly different resources all utilize them, does it prove they're indispensable or just useful tools?
Hmm. Okay, so not just cash, not just for the elite, but managing them. That sounds tricky, like a real balancing act.
It absolutely is. The fundamental challenge is this. You need to protect the original principal amount.
Keep the core funds safe.
Right, because it needs to last, ideally, forever. But you also need to generate enough income each year to actually spend on things the university needs now.
And that spending target is usually around.
The widely accepted figure is around 5% withdrawal rate annually. That's sort of this standard advice.
Okay.
But, and this is a big but, market volatility can throw a huge wrench into those plans.
Oh, yeah, I bet. Like the 2008 crash.
Exactly. That's a perfect example. Endowment values plummeted across the board. The average drop was something like 18.7%.
Ouch. That must have hurt.
It forced even really wealthy schools like Stanford to make serious budget cuts, freeze hiring. It really shows endowments aren't some kind of magic shield against economic reality.
So they're vulnerable too. And then you add back in those restrictions we talked about. Do they ever become outdated?
Oh, definitely. That's another layer of complexity. These purpose restrictions can mean funds are locked into supporting things that just aren't relevant anymore. Well, there was a fascinating investigation in 2024 by the Chronicle of Higher Education. They found examples of endowment funds still earmarked for things like, get this, typewriter maintenance training from the 1950s.
You're kidding. Typewriter maintenance.
I am not kidding. And the really tricky part is, even if the university desperately needs money for, say, AI research or something cutting edge,
They can't easily touch the typewriter fund.
it can be incredibly difficult legally to repurpose those old restricted funds. It really challenges that idea that the endowment is always there for the most pressing current needs.
Wow. Okay, that's quite a restriction. So they're complicated, they're restricted, they're vulnerable. But let's look at what they do achieve. Scholarships are the big one everyone talks about, right?
Yes, that's definitely one of the most visible and, frankly, positive uses. Big endowments allow universities like Harvard to provide substantial financial aid.
I saw something about that recently.
In 2023, Harvard reportedly used about $200 million from its endowment for financial aid. That helped them cover full tuition for students from families earning under $75,000 a year.
That's fantastic. That makes a real difference to accessibility.
It absolutely does. It's a powerful way endowment income helps students.
But are there universities managing significant aid without relying quite so heavily on huge endowments?
Oh, for sure. Look at the University of California system. UC Berkeley, for instance. Big school, good reputation, but its endowment, while large at around $6.8 billion, is way smaller than Harvard's.
Right.
In 2023, Berkeley awarded something like $740 million in financial aid. Huge amount.
Wow. Where did that come from, mostly?
Well, only about 10% came from their endowment, the rest.
Yeah.
State funding, tuition revenue, federal aid like Pell Grants, a mix.
Interesting. Any other examples?
Yeah, think about Miami-Dade College. It's a community college. Its endowment is relatively small, maybe $50 million.
Right.
Yet they provide scholarships to something like 60% of their students. How? Aggressive fundraising, community partnerships, corporate sponsorships.
So they find other ways. It really shows a massive endowment isn't the only path to helping students afford college.
Exactly. It highlights that alternative strategies can be really effective.
Okay, so aid can be funded differently. What about things like faculty salaries, attracting top professors, funding research? That's another area linked to endowments, isn't it?
It is. Endowments often fund endowed professorships, special positions that help attract and keep top scholars. And they can provide seed money for new research projects.
Like Oxford, I imagine they use theirs for that.
They do. Oxford, with its $3 billion or so endowment, supports professorships and research. In 2022, I think they put about $10 million from the endowment into a climate modeling project.
So it helps kickstart important work?
It can, yes. But again, let's look at alternatives. The University of Michigan has a hefty $17 billion endowment.
Oh.
Right? But only about 15% of its massive research budget actually comes from that endowment income.
Only 15%. Where is the rest from?
Mostly federal grants, NIH, NSF, that sort of thing, plus industry partnerships, and tuition revenue plays a part too.
So even with a big endowment, they rely elsewhere for research funding.
Heavily. And look at smaller places. Cal State Fullerton Endowment, around $90 million. They rely on faculty winning external grants and on state funding for their research, and they do good work.
And what about paying the professors themselves?
Well, take the CUNY system in New York, the City University of New York. Collectively, across all campuses, maybe a $500 million endowment. Not huge for such a large system.
Right.
They primarily pay faculty salaries, through tuition revenue and state appropriations from New York. So clearly, endowments aren't the only game in town for attracting good faculty or funding research.
Okay, so scholarships, faculty, research, check. Alternatives exist. What about buildings, the physical campus? Those beautiful old halls at places like Oxford? Endowment money?
Often, yes. Endowments are frequently tapped for capital projects renovating old buildings, preserving historic architecture. Oxford definitely uses its endowment to help maintain its centuries-old structures.
Like the Radcliffe camera, that iconic library.
Exactly. I
Huh.
think in 2021 they allocated something like £5 million from the endowment just for restoring that building.
It's a big part of their image, I suppose. But how do universities without that kind of endowment money manage big building projects or upkeep?
Public universities often rely on state bonds or dedicated fundraising campaigns specifically for a new building or major renovation.
Okay.
The University of Texas system, for example, they have massive endowment, actually over $30 billion, largely from oil lands.
Right.
But when they built a big new engineering complex in 2023 costing $200 million, most of that came from state funds and specific alumni donations, not the main endowment.
Interesting. The endowment wasn't the primary source.
Played a minor role in that specific project. And again, community colleges, Houston Community College, maybe a $30 million endowment. They keep their facilities running using local taxes and federal grants. They got $50 million in 2022 for upgrades that way.
So state funds, local taxes, specific donations. Again, other ways to get it done.
It shows infrastructure doesn't solely depend on endowment payouts.
It really seems like for almost everything, students, faculty, buildings, endowments help. But they aren't the only answer. What about outreach? Connecting with the wider community.
The endowments can support that too. Oxford, again, uses endowment money for the Oxford Hub, a student group working with local charities.
Okay.
And they also fund research partnerships, like one with the University of Cape Town on infectious diseases, partly through endowment funds.
Those sound like valuable initiatives, but can universities do that kind of thing without relying on endowment income?
Absolutely. University of Wisconsin-Madison, moderate endowment, around $4 billion.
Mm-hmm.
They run community programs, like free health clinics. But that's mostly funded by state grants and private donations, not endowment returns.
So different funding streams for outreach?
Yep. And look at Eastern Michigan University, small endowment, maybe $100 million. They have strong community partnerships, lots of student volunteer hours,
How's that funded?
primarily through their regular operating budget, grants they apply for, and specific fundraising efforts. It shows community engagement is about commitment, not just endowment size.
Let's circle back to Oxford specifically. It's often held up as the prime example, right? Endowment success story.
It is, and you can see why. That $3 billion endowment supports scholarships, world-class research, those incredible historic buildings. It definitely contributes to their prestige and ability to attract talent.
But as we've kind of hinted, it's not the whole story for them, is it?
Not at all. That's the crucial point. While the endowment is important, Oxford relies heavily on other income too.
Like what?
Tuition fees, for one, both UK and international students. Then massive amounts from research grants and contracts.
Right.
In 2023, their total income was something like £2.8 billion. The endowment payout, only about 10% of that, maybe $280 million.
Only 10%.
Roughly, yeah. The vast majority, 90%, came from tuition, research grants, and other things like donations and commercial activities.
Wow. So even Oxford isn't living off its endowment. It's just one piece of a much bigger financial puzzle.
Precisely. A significant piece, but far from the only piece.
And we know there are other top global universities with much smaller endowments, right?
Absolutely. University of Tokyo consistently rank among the world's best. Their endowment, around $1.2 billion. Much smaller than Oxford's.
How do they manage?
They rely heavily on Japanese government support. That's about 60% of their budget, plus tuition and strong industry partnership.
Okay, another example.
University of Toronto, another global leader, endowment around $2.5 billion. Again, smaller than the very top U.S. ones, or Oxford. They depend significantly on provincial government funding from Ontario, plus tuition.
So world-class status doesn't automatically equal needing a Harvard-sized endowment.
Doesn't seem to correlate directly, no.
Yes.
Excellence comes in different financial packages.
And even the things Oxford does with its endowment, like outreach or partnerships, could those be funded differently?
Potentially, yes. Look at the University of Edinburgh. Endowment around $1 billion. They do community STEM workshops, similar to Oxford's outreach.
How do they fund it?
Government grants, corporate sponsorships. They also had a big biotech partnership for cancer research recently.
Endowment funded.
Nope, financed entirely through external investment. So again, it shows these valuable activities don't require endowment funding, even if it helps.
This really brings us back to that core question then, especially with those recent controversies, the backlash, loss of funding for some big endowment schools.
Yeah, that scrutiny definitely pushes the question forward. Are these huge endowments truly necessary?
And based on what we've talked about, the answer seems to be maybe not.
The evidence strongly suggests universities can thrive without massive endowments, or by relying on them less. They need other strategies.
Like what? What are the key alternatives?
Well, number one is diversifying revenue streams. We talked about tuition. It's controversial because of accessibility concerns.
Right, keeping costs down is vital.
Absolutely.
Huh.
But managed carefully, perhaps with modest increases tied directly to robust financial aid, it's a major funding source for many, like the UC system or NYU.
Okay. Tuition is one stream. What else?
Grants and partnerships. We saw MIT funds most of its research that way, despite its own large endowment. Even smaller schools like San Jose State successfully compete for NSF grants and industry funding.
So really focusing on bringing in external money for specific purposes.
Exactly. Don't just rely on passive endowment income. And then there's optimizing what you already have.
Becoming more efficient.
Yes. Studies suggest there's often significant administrative overhead at universities. The Lumina Foundation estimated potential savings around 20% in some cases.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, University of Arizona recently made headlines for saving tens of millions through restructuring. And leveraging technology online learning, like Arizona State University does so well, can reach more students efficiently, potentially reducing the need for massive infrastructure spending funded by endowments. ASU relies much less on its endowment than many peers.
So diversification, efficiency, technology,
Yeah.
are there completely different models for universities too?
There are. You have for-profit models, like University of Phoenix, which operate entirely without endowments, funded by tuition, and nonprofits like Western Governors University.
Okay.
Small endowment, mostly online, competency-based, funded by fees and grants.
And the international examples.
Right. Countries like Germany or Norway offer largely free higher education funded by taxes. Very little reliance on endowments there. University of Oslo gets maybe 90% of its funding from the government, despite having a decent endowment itself.
Okay, let's try to really picture this. Imagine a university deciding, okay, we're not going to rely on an endowment. How would it work? Day to day, year to year.
It would force a different mindset, wouldn't it? Scholarships might rely entirely on annual fundraising drives and strong relationships with donors for current needs.
Like Berea College does.
Exactly. They cover tuition through work programs, donations, federal aid, no tuition fees charged. Research would be all about aggressively pursuing grants and industry partnerships, like Michigan does for the bulk of its research.
And buildings, new labs, dorms.
You'd probably see more reliance on state bonds for public universities or specific capital campaigns and maybe public-private partnerships like UT Austin used.
Okay. And community stuff.
That might lean more on volunteerism, local business sponsorships, operational funds like Eastern Michigan.
It sounds like it could make universities leaner, maybe more directly accountable to their current funders and community needs. Perhaps more innovative out of sheer necessity.
That's definitely the argument. Less cushion could mean more hustle, more responsiveness. And it's not purely theoretical.
Oh.
University of Minnesota had an interesting situation in 2023. Due to market issues, they temporarily froze spending from their endowment.
And what happened? Did everything grind to a halt?
Nope. They kept operating, awarding aid, funding research,
Yeah.
using their other revenue streams. It was a real-world, albeit temporary, demonstration that the endowment wasn't the only thing keeping the lights on.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So wrapping this all up, the main takeaway here seems to be that endowments, while nice to have, maybe even very beneficial.
They're not the be-all and end-all.
Right. They aren't absolutely essential for a university to succeed or even to be excellent.
Universities can definitely thrive through other means: creativity, being efficient, diversifying their funding, having a really clear mission.
We've seen great examples across the board, haven't we? Oxford, sure, but also Tokyo, UC Berkeley, Miami-Dade College, Cal State Fullerton. Excellence exists at all sorts of endowment levels and funding models.
The size of the bank account doesn't automatically define the quality of the education or the impact of the research.
Yeah, it really feels like the focus maybe ought to be more on making education accessible and impactful rather than just, boasting about the size of the endowment fund.
I think that's a crucial point. Which leads to a final thought, maybe something for you, the listener, to chew on.
Okay.
If we did shift the focus away from this traditional endowment model, what fundamental changes in how we finance higher education might actually become possible, or maybe even become necessary?
Hmm. What could higher ed look like if endowments weren't the main financial goalpost?
Yeah.
That's definitely something to think about.